precisely goes back to the time of this movement called the Tariq-e-Hijra, in which people felt at that time they had to leave the lands that the British were dominating towards the lands that were free. And since Afghanistan was not colonized directly, then they fled to Afghanistan. So those people, some people estimate upwards to about 200,000 at that time. They now are, and their descendants, near 1 million people. That any close mixture in Afghan communities and Afghan gatherings, you will find at least one person that will say our origins or our roots are in Kashmir. So not just going that way, also the other way, in which if you look at historically with Ahmad Shah Abdali, a lot of people also don't know that Kashmir, Afghanistan, big chunks of Afghanistan, not all of present day Afghanistan, but the majority of present day Afghanistan, and the entirety of present day Pakistan, and the entirety of Kashmir, historic Kashmir, were part of one single empire led by Ahmad Shah Abdali, Rahman Baba. So there is this link. And another very interesting point is that not only is this close affinity between the two people, the first Shaheed, 1931, Yom al-Shuhada, celebrated every year in Kashmir as Martyrs' Day, was Abdul Qadir Khan, who came from Peshawar, who protested the brutalities of the Dogra regime on the Kashmiri people, and he was killed while trying to say the adhan. And one after another, people followed him until 22 people were killed trying to complete the adhan in Srinagar. And this has transformed into the collective Kashmiri consciousness as the Day of the Martyrs, Yom al-Shuhada. It was started by technically an Afghan. So there is, and then of course the descendants of so many, you will find these last names very prominent within the valley. Durrani, from the title of Ahmad Shah Abdali, Dure Duran. So there is this deep link. And so I'm very impressed, and I was very enthusiastic when this opportunity came forward of discussing how the two tragic situations are linked, and how and what needs to be done regionally, internationally, to kind of rectify these issues or do something more concrete. So just to kind of thank Professor Wahabuddin for his presentation, I would also agree completely that unfortunately in Afghanistan you had democratization without democracy. There was not a space, a legitimate internalized space of managing discontent, reconciling diversity with an agreed platform between the people themselves, which is fundamental. Irrespective of the Uzbek, Tajik, Pashtun, or irrespective of the ethnicity or the ideological angle, there needed to and needs to be an attempt at reconciling that diversity in a collectivity above and beyond those differences. Every society will have differences. And that's still a work in progress. But inshallah, I do believe, I'm hopeful. I understand that a lot of people may not be, but I'm hopeful. I'm hoping that now is one of the best times that we have for being realistically trying to achieve at least a better peace than there was ever in the last 30, 40 years. I'm just hoping that that materializes. So just to give you that background of the deep links between Kashmir and Afghanistan, coming to the issue of Kashmir, for Kashmiris, the real issue has always fundamentally been about the brutality, especially after a promise that the will of the people will be ascertained. So the Kashmiri people want that choice, and they have the right. They have the right to demand that self-determination, whether that is in the form of some type of union with Pakistan, whether that is in the form of independence, or whether for practically speaking, if they want to be with India. Kashmiri people have never been given that choice. And what India has constantly done ever since 1947, it's used trickery, it's used obfuscation, it's used huge amounts of money to kind of water down, it's used murder, corruption now, and it's used rape, and now 1 million army force to deny Kashmiris their right. And that has been the crux of the problem. Every generation growing up in Kashmir has now had to manage and reconcile with this, this brutish, barbaric force. And every generation is resisting ever so strongly. And this is going to continue. This trajectory continues throughout human history when you try to oppress people, when you deny them their space, when you deny them the voice. And on top of that, you're bearing young boys away from their families. You're crippling, especially for a Muslim society, when you are attacking the honor of the family, the women and the girls and the mothers. You do this. This is unforgivable and irreconcilable. And this is what they've done. Now, to put it in perspective, I know that many of our viewers may not know the entirety of the region, but the disputed territory of Jammu and Kashmir consists of 5 areas, right? That is what is known as Gilgit-Baltistan, another area which is referred to as Azad Kashmir, Jammu, Ladakh, and what we'll refer to as the Valley of Kashmir, okay, Wadi of Kashmir, which is the heart of the cultural and ethnic culture of the entire area. Now, Kashmiri can also refer to the people in this entire area, irrespective of ethnicity, because they are part of the disputed territory. So ethnically, politically, they are Kashmiris, and they are state subjects, meaning they'll be the ones allowed to vote in any future plebiscite. Or it can also refer to this one of the ethnic groups, not all of them, but the majority ethnic group, which is the ethnic Kashmiri Muslim in this region. So the terms Kashmiris can be used for many things, but there are also other communities. There are communities of Pashtuns that have been living in this region for a long time. There are communities of Abbasi, of Raje, different tribes that some people may not be familiar with, but they're there. People of the Potahar Plateau. And so there are multiple ethnic and tribal divisions in addition to the Kashmiris. There's the Gujaris and the Bakarwals. So it is complex, but nonetheless, there is complete unanimity of purpose in which they all want to be free of this Indian occupation. And what we see now today, rather than going to the long history of it, it really begins though in 1846, is when the British sold Kashmir. I'm not even joking, this is something that people may not be familiar with. They sold Kashmir, its animals, its people, to a family, one non-Kashmiri family, because that family was providing basically cannon fodder, cheap soldiers to the British so they could fight their Afghan war, in which you can see what happened to them in that war. But this was one of the deep grievances and what's called the Treaty of Amritsar of 1846. And that Kashmiris refer to as the sale deed, the infamous tragic sale deed of Kashmir, when an illegitimate, immoral authority sold something that they didn't have to another illegitimate, immoral authority. And since that time, there has been this struggle of resistance in various phases in Kashmiri history. And there have been various levels of massacres. There was the first traders union revolt against the Droga happened in Kashmir. Some people attribute this to the first union revolt. There was, of course, as I mentioned, 1931, the Yom al-Shuhada, the massacre of the Muslims in Srinagar revolting against the Dogra. At this time, while all this upheaval was going on, there was a movement that had begun within the British Raj that brought together a diverse group of Muslims and created a Hizb. That Hizb was the Muslim League. And that group was extremely far-sighted. And it had people like, of course, Muhammad Iqbal, Allama Iqbal. It had people like Muhammad Ali Jinnah. It had others too, the Sahrawardi, the Ali brothers. This is a large group. We know some of their names, but there's a large group of people here, including, by the way, even the relatives of Imran Khan were in this this Muslim League group. And they had an idea with the collapse of and the weakening of the Uthmaniyya Khulafa. They had an idea that let's try to create an Islamic nation state. And they canvassed for this idea throughout the British Raj. And it never had, at the beginning, a lot of people rejected it, especially people from a more traditionalist thinking. And this tore society in many ways. And then when it comes to Kashmir, two movements had emerged. One was the Muslim Conference, and then a splinter group away from the Muslim Conference became the National Conference. And in many ways, to put it in perspective, you could refer to one as a type of Hizbul Islam and the other one is Hizbul Watan. So one is based on the unity based on Islam, and another one is unity based on your ethnicity. So these two groups formed. And not to say always the one that was formed on Islam was only Islam, and neither was the one formed on Watan away from Islam necessarily, but the ideological foundations of both were quite clear. One had a pan-Islamic vision, officially, and the other one said, well, really it wanted independence and tried to negotiate in that regard. But these two groups had kind of emerged in society. Now, there has never been any type of fair election within Kashmir to find out, well, what did these people really want? What happened at that time is something fascinating. There was a visit to Kashmir by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And right after that visit, the Dogra regime initiated a massacre. And this is called the Jammu Massacre, and of which almost 250,000 people were killed. 500,000 people were pushed into Pakistan. This sets the tone of what we see today, the Jammu Massacre. As a matter of fact, my family is a product of the Jammu Massacre. The surviving members of my family eventually had came over to Muzaffarabad, Azad Kashmir at that time, and from that time onwards have not been able to go back. Now, what's interesting about that, after the Jammu massacres, when news spread of the killings, then there was this really autonomous and eruption of Muslim fervor, especially coming from the tribal belt, from the Pashtuns, from the Afghan brothers, and Kashmiris themselves collectively came together and revolted against the Dogra. They took over Gilgit-Baltistan, they took over Azad Kashmir, and the dividing, what we call the ceasefire line that you have today, is a result of that eruption, that what some people in India refer to as the tribal invasion, but it was a reaction against the Jammu massacre. And then you had this entire area that almost amounts to close to about 40% of the total land mass of the disputed territory retaken. And then you have this significant chunks of territory that remain under Indian occupation. The matter was taken to the United Nations by India. India took it to the United Nations, and Nehru made a promise that we cannot make any decision without ascertaining the will of the people. Now, what is so sad and tragic is that after saying that, India has done everything possible to deny the people their right of self-determination and deny them the ability to choose, and has done everything in the world possible to kind of cover the world's eyes on very important things. For example, they've tried to deny that there was a problem. They've tried to insist that it is a local Kashmiri, indigenous or internal matter for India. None of this is true. Kashmir has never been a part of India. Kashmir will never be a part of India. But the Indians insist, at least even in the intelligentsia, that it is. And this is where a lot of the tension rises, is that people keep insisting or denying someone's agency. And essentially in that regard, that brings us to present day. India has not been able to control Kashmir. It has not been able to pacify the people. It has not been able to buy them with all the literally billions of dollars that it has spent inside. And honestly, I'm even ashamed if anyone really knows, if this was spread within India, the amount of money they have thrown to try to keep Kashmir wasted, thrown away, so much of it just gone into the coffers of a few of these, what Kashmiris refer to as these chamche, these puppets, these good for nothing, associates of empire and oppression, then they would be appalled. The world would be appalled. Indians would be offended that all that money you're spending. And what about Indian society itself and the poverty and the suffering there? So it is a huge, enormous waste of resources, but it's ideological. And in so many ways, India has been forced and still has not come around to accepting what everybody else in the world now is accepting, that this is not a part of India, and they're having difficulty reconciling this. But coming more to now, post August 5th, when basically India, quote unquote, took off the gloves, threw out any decorum, threw out any even lip service to the rule of law, lip service to constitutionalism and legality, threw everything out the window, and has basically openly said they're going to try to ethnically cleanse Kashmir, repopulate it with non-Kashmiris, and then trying to do the demographic change that was possible in 1947, but it's inconceivable how you can do such a, what are you going to do with 8 million people in the valley and another 3-4 million people in Jammu and Ladakh? And do you think that Pakistan is going to sit by idly, or Azad Kashmir and the government is going to sit by idly? So it is a really risky gamble, but this fascist government now coming into the fascism, it plays a completely different role. And it's not logical, nor is it rational. The decision-making of its decision-making is completely haphazard. They have no idea really of what they've done and where it's going. Their only strategy is do it worse, do it more. And that's basically because of what Professor Simon refers to as a clinical psychologist as predatory aggression and narcissistic bullying. See, the Hindutva movement fed itself a false lie that for so long the Muslims have been invading us and taking our land and have hurt us, and now is our time to get it back. This is a fundamental part of their ethos and their thinking, none of which is true. So the areas that became Pakistan were never historically part of India. India too is a modern innovation. The word itself is from the British word, right? So India is a British word. What did they call themselves? Definitely not Hind, because that's also Arabic and Persian. So, but no one minds going into the reality of these terms and what they mean and how it builds these social imaginaries and mythical narratives, and how those mythical narratives are sometimes believed even more than the truth. They're firmly held onto, that they have dissected Mother India, they have violated Mother India, and now they're trying to do it again. Now, reasoning with someone and saying, well, look, neither their language, nor their culture, nor their history has anything to do with India. But then they create these false histories and false imaginaries, and they spread it. So this is the depth and the complexity of the problem. And for us, part of our organization's work is to unravel this, is to unravel all the ways that India has built up lie after lie and trying to confuse and confound not only the Kashmiris, but their own population. And our struggle is not only on a struggle of the right of self-determination to stop the human rights violations and crimes, but also to unravel the lies, unravel the false history that they have perpetuated for so long. And that brings us now to what happening at this very moment is that they have basically lost control of the entire region of Kashmir. The only way to hold it is by the 1 million soldiers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very inspirational and excited way of explaining on what is the situation in Kashmir and then the history of what we are actually how we can see that.